Hi everyone, my name's Therese and I will be emceeing this Pegasus Books poetry reading. I just wanted to say a big thank you to Rose Lou and Chris Teese, who have been the instigators of this online reading series. So as you are aware, I'm sure normally we have these readings at Pegasus Books, which is in Cuba Street in Wellington, but of course we can't because of lockdown, and so we've been doing them online. So this is our second one of our online readings, and it's just been great having Rose and Chris as the kind of the organizers and the technical brains behind all of this. So thank you to you guys. So we have got 4 readers this evening. We have Kate Camp, Mary Macpherson, Bill Nelson and James Norcliffe, and they are going to be reading in that order. So I will just pop up in between and introduce each reader and give you a very brief bio. Very brief, I might add, and each reader is going to read for around about 10 or so minutes. So our first reader tonight is Kate Camp, who I can see over in that far corner for me. Kate has written many collections of poetry, 6 I think in total, and very exciting for us, she has got a selected and a new poems coming out in September from VUP, and that's also going to be co-published in Canada with a place called House of Anansi Press. And it has the very excellent title of How to Be Happy Though Human. Very good. Welcome, Kate.
Oh, kia ora tātou. Gosh, so yeah, it's so nice to be able to do a poetry reading from my kitchen table. I thought I would read just a couple of poems from that book, which I'm very excited to have coming out later. That's the cover there of the manuscript that I'm working on. It's actually a Leslie Atkin photo from the Te Papa collection of apples ripening, and it was all, of course, the book was written and all the cover art was chosen well before lockdown, but it seems particularly appropriate now in the sense of hibernation and hoarding that we've all been getting into. So I thought I'd read just a couple of poems from that manuscript and then some newer things. So I'll start off with the poem, How to Be Happy Though Human. From the circle, there was a man we couldn't see, just his fingers held out for emphasis, like the hands of a primary school teacher. Before that, we'd been at the film where 3 people taxidermied a baby zebra, caught in the moment of standing for the first time. I go back to the wings of the stage of my school's assembly hall, smell of dust and afternoons. We're hiding from folk dancing, which we love. And I go back to Saturday. We dance with other people, other people's children, create community with physics. Memory is a kind of mourning. We take each other's hands as if they were made for that, and we form a circle. That was an amazing night. We went to the gig, went to Live Rust, and then that weekend we went to a Scottish Ceilidh. Both things that I'm highly recommending to myself once I'm able to do again. And then this poem feels like it could be a lockdown poem, but it isn't. But it's got a suburban walk in it, which is our main form of entertainment. Walking up the zigzag. Walking up the zigzag, a harbour behind me, an ocean, if you think of it, and mountains going by the name of hills. Someone has been along to paint the railings, white on the cutback ivy. You sometimes see a patch like that on the wings of a tui. On the whole, I disapprove my neighbours' houses. Hard to reach, hard for the sun to reach. a bulge of foam where someone tried to seal a leaking window, a trailer with its freight of dirt-filled plant pots. Even their street numbers, the 3 here is upside down, its tail at the top and stub cutting short at the bottom. A childhood friend lived there in that sad apartment facing south, her baby coughing. She was not a good person, but still. I turned for home, no wind, the smell of grass, of night coming on. There's no one, just my body, that faithful one for company. I take the last few turns in darkness, steep, short of breath. These legs have been mine all my life. Hot hands, small nights within my lungs. We are fortunate to live in a world. We are fortunate to live in a world where some person, some man is painting railings on the zigzag. And when he finished, he could have raised his eyes and seen beyond the black tree hills, some ragged and fast-moving clouds. And then I thought I would just read some poems that I've written during the lockdown. So normally I always have my writing morning on a Wednesday morning, as those who know me know. And that's the morning I have off work. And I've done the same during the lockdown. I've been working from home and I've been poetrying from home as well. So I'm just keeping an eye on the time and thinking about what I've got time to read. I might just read these 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so these are where my head's been at. This is Wittenberg. The first time I travelled by car in Germany was with a woman whose name I don't remember, the friend of a friend. And she drove us to Wittenberg to see the place where Martin Luther nailed those things to the door, although when we arrived, the church was shut, and I don't think we ever got in there. The streets were quiet and empty, as if we'd stepped into a miniature town, closed for the season. There must have been a museum, an interpretive centre, because I saw an image of people gathered for some kind of carp harvest. They stood in a moat and stirred or beat the water with paddles. It was a social thing for which the village would gather. I'm remembering now getting lost in a garden. I'd wandered off and came back to a driveway where fire doors were closed, a service entrance to the back of the museum. It is a moment of utter banality, retained in my mind like CCTV footage. On the way back to Berlin, we stopped on the roadside. There were apple trees and fruit, and people pulled their cars up onto the grass to stand on the roofs and pick them, and we did the same. Annie, that was her name. Annie did the same, and we picked some apples, and all around us in the grass were soft, brown, rotting apples, like sugary, liquid planets. Driving in France. Approaching the toll gate, the road expands, an unlaned delta with markings of coins and cards, I realise, late, but somehow have the coins to hand. Instead of a slot or booth, there's some kind of chute, a grey opening like the inside of a horn, and one simply throws the coins in there, where they're weighed and read, I suppose, by some machine. A little earlier on this mildly harrowing journey, I pulled into a roadside rest stop. 2 girls were running in the cold on a patch of grass. Someone peeled a boiled egg and placed the shell in an overflowing bin. The day before, I'd been late to leave the cemetery. I was looking out to sea, with such a sense of space? Who thought of how the D-Day beaches would be beaches with sound of waves and a coast's neutral therapeutic smell? But then today, the today of this memory, across the early winter field, which was flat with the stubs of some fawn gold crop already harvested, I saw the shape of Mont Saint-Michel. Of course, it was a sudden joy. A terribly windy day. You walk across a causeway. And my process when I write a poem, I have my writing group on a Wednesday night. We meet by video conference, and we used to meet in the real world, but about 10 years ago, we started meeting by video when I moved overseas, and it's so much more convenient. But I always make little drawings and annotations on my poems. So there's the Le Mont Saint-Michel and a few scribbles there of what my writing group have said. Now you'll remember, 4 weeks ago, whatever it was, it feels like a couple of years, there was that really foggy day in Wellington. The day started as white. It perhaps shouldn't have been a surprise, that page outside the window, its black trees like twigs resting in a glass of milk. And then I had the power to pull across the curtain, make and unmake my own walls and barriers, block out or disclose pines, and beyond them pines, and in the distance pines, black sentinels at the invisible head of the harbour. When we came to this house, there was nothing in it, never had been. We would lie on the floor, on the beige floor in the dappled light. The first night, I came here with my mother in the dark, and we stood in the yellow light together. You were down with your mother, who was dying, and could only say supermarket when she meant Saturday. There were no curtains then, no blinds that in the wind vibrate like living things, like gills or the membranes of insects. We slept with undies on our heads to block out the light. This quilt we use in autumn and in spring was made by my grandmother. It's rough sea green silk on one side, some small stains, tears and marks. The back is leaf green and perfect from being always on the underside. I take off the headband I've been wearing. Has it been compressing my head, or is that just a headache? I place it on the dust jacket of the book I'm reading, a thin brown plastic horseshoe. The tui is making its sounds, descending bleeps of people losing lives in a video game, some repetitive graunches, a light whistle. A single car drifts past my hearing, like a small wave that rills onto a beach and isn't followed by another. And I thought I'd finish off with this poem, My Mother in the Lockdown. Mum's dog had her second eye removed. With her cone, she navigates space like a satellite dish, a paw reaching carefully for the ground. Mum sourced illegal elastic and a bell, and that's how she spent the lockdown, like a solitary Morris dancer. I saw her once only, sitting at her door, and I sat in the garden like drama students engaged in some mirroring exercise, and she had the golden bell on her knee, and I was cold because weather, and Holly came from the house in a widening course that eventually included me and wagged her ratty tail. And I know Mum's up there now doing twisting yoga on the internet or reading the part of some minor character with her Shakespeare group, some indecipherable joke made by a servant, or she's cooking something with all those brown paper sachets like offerings. And when I call, her face looks like the moon, a friendly moon, because she doesn't hold the iPad up. It's a long time since I saw her from below. Thanks all. Lovely to do reading.
Thank you, Kate. That was absolutely gorgeous. So wonderful to hear some of those new poems, and also I'm incredibly jealous of you being very productive during lockdown and doing writing. I have found it almost impossible. So beautiful stuff. Thank you. Okay, and thank you to everyone who's joined in. And I see my friend Hilda there. Hi, Hilda. It's lovely to see you all. So the next reader that we've got, and Rasheen. The next reader that we've got tonight is Mary Macpherson. So thank you for being here, Mary. Mary is a Wellington poet and photographer. Her first solo collection, Social Media, was recently published by the Cuba Press. Her photographs have been widely exhibited and published, and she is also the reviews editor for the Photo Forum website. So thank you, Mary. Welcome.
Thank you. So just going to switch to gallery view so I can see myself. Hello, Sudha, here, waving at you. So thank you all, everyone, for having me and for coming. And I'm going to be reading from my book, Social Media. You can see the cover. And since this is a Zoom meeting, I thought I'd start with a digital poem. On being unwilling to click, I forgot my password. For a while, living a digital life was like being a successful swan, dignified, gliding over the lake, like you understood the way the world worked, the world being hard, bright stones at the bottom of the lake, and you on the surface held up. Then you forgot that word. There were hundreds at your disposal: confetti, opera, ice cream, cat, acrostic, blooming, blimming, dahlia. You could dive into a room full of tiny, crunchy jigsaw pieces of words. You know you're just holding onto the rope out of cussedness. This involves sneaky excuses that don't stack up and is not a quality you admire in yourself, but keeps you holding on like a mad terrier who's going to be exterminated for believing that the grip of its little jaws will drag the daylight through. Or it's like refusing to jump into the far below. Feel the swoosh of dark green closing over your head, bubbles and squirming. Or being the child crouched under the far corner of the bed while the big ones call and call. So I'm going to read some poems from, a section in the book which is about a group of fictional characters. They're imaginatively called X and Y, who are a couple, and their friends S and R. And they're a group of people who think a lot about each other and worry about each other. So I'm going to read 3 poems from that section. River. R worries about the plants, the summer they've had, and lately. The rain poured from the sky. In his worry, a moment's darkness in his eyes. There are gardens of stressed ferns and dahlias, stricken with incurable diseases. X worries about his small, shiny dog, finding his fears and dreams where the dog is slippery or broken, and he can't hold her above people's head in the crowded train. Y worries about what X worries about. He should worry about more meaningful things. Perhaps the dog is an avatar for these fears. She puts her worry into the river of things she keeps in her mind. S worries about the sales of his inventions, ideas that have followed him for years. All this may not be redeemed. X and Y about S's worry, turning it over. Y worries that they're being smug. She knows how desire blots out the sun. She writes the word replaceable in a notebook and worries about stringiness. S dwells on the thought of having plants to eat. He'd leave immediately for another country. He invites X and Y to go with him. His friends are quiet, worrying about how they'd earn a living and how they couldn't live exactly as they do now. So in this next poem, it's a poem between Y and X, and they're quite a fractious couple. Y as X. When Y writes as X, she thinks she should write sentences like jabs in a boxing match, but pulled at the last minute by a sudden funniness. How does he do that? She looks at X's writing and sees his sentences are often shockingly short. X would never write a word like disbenefit, and then in a long parenthesis explain that surprisingly the word does exist, and how he feels embarrassed that he didn't know, and that the person who used the word had a blocky confidence they would rise in the organisation, so took words from the course rather than the older ones with their shabby disadvantages, and how this upsets X in ways he can't explain. Close parenthesis. When X sees Y's attempts to write as him, he's startled by the bluntness of the text. He's become an alarmingly savage person. Put in, please, there and there, he tells Y, and thank her. End by thanking her. So I'm just going to skip over a couple of pages. So this next poem, and it's the last one I'll read, is one where Y is thinking about, there's a little reference to X in it, but it's mostly a dialogue between Y and S. There are also footnotes in it, which is a little weird to read out, but I'm just going to read them at the end. Subtraction. 1. How can a person be imagined? Y wonders. She's inside a story about two people who write to each other for years. When they meet, the peaking blinds and thick lace tablecloth fly up and cover their heads. Descriptions slip like unstable earth. 2. What would she say about S? Kindness shot through with envy? No, more like extravagantly open. Something about reeling the world backwards until an order that matters to S is revealed. 3. You think I'm just a figment of your brain, X says to Y. Y isn't sure that figment is the right word. You think you can just make things up about me. If you turn off that part of your brain, I'll disappear. You reach for X's soft leather jacket, which smells intoxicatingly of wounded pride. She wants to see herself entwined, a word that belongs in one of those old songs her parents used to sing in the car. How would X look without her? How would he live without her disapproval? Would she be a duller person without his clever little dog? Footnotes. 1. Y has learned this technique from the many interviews she's been to. What would so-and-so say about you? She plunges into the milky lake of words. Quick, clear beats to the nearest raft. Get there is what she thinks. 2. Would it be more accurate if she described herself and compared S with that description? Can she only say who a person is by subtracting them from another? And that's me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was lovely. It was really lovely to hear you read as well. Yay, all right, we're cracking through. So we've now, our next reader tonight is Bill Nelson. And with these readings, I always ask everyone to send me a bio. And so I like the different styles that people write in. So I'm just going to read yours word for word, Bill. Bill Nelson has just returned to Wellington from Scotland and France. It was okay. His first book of poetry, Memorandum of Understanding, was published by VUP in 2016. He is co-editor at Upcountry, a journal for the New Zealand outdoors, and his work has appeared in journals, dance performances, and on billboards. He's working on a long thing right now that could be either a poem or a novel or something else entirely. He'd really like someone to tell him what it is. Welcome, Bill.
Hi everybody, thanks for inviting me along, Therese, and whoever else is involved in organising. It's really good to be here and doing some poetry while at home. So yeah, welcome to my bedroom. Someone made the bed, so that's good. And I've got my IT support headset on, so if anyone has any issues, fire them through. I'll probably just say reboot the computer or something like that. So yeah, I'm going to read a couple of short poems and then a part of that long thing that Therese mentioned. So I've kind of got a first draft of it together, but there's a few bits that I could read out from that. It's sort of novel-like, sort of poetry-like, so hopefully that comes across okay. But the first one is called Rotational Head Injury. Came about after a few years ago. I had a cycling accident actually, and had a bit of a head injury, which was an interesting experience, memory loss and all that kind of thing. So it seemed ripe for a poem, really. Rotational head injury. Ever since I did the thing I can't remember I did, we've tried to piece it together. The helmet with barely a scratch, the pine needles in bizarre places, the tendons, ropey and tender in my neck. I've asked you this before, haven't I? I keep saying as you nod, falling deep into a pool of synesthesia. Ever since I did the thing I did not do, a ropey concern, synesthesia, like tendons in bizarre places, the eye, my neck. We've tried to keep saying this before, piece it back together. Have we been here before? Falling deep, I ask, in a pool of pine needles. Have I or haven't I? I can't remember my synesthesia, the thing I did or since, a bizarre place of us forever, the helmet with barely a scratch, tender and ropey, the neck asking before we keep saying, piece it together. A nod to the deep, pine needle pool, tender and falling. Ever since we did the thing I can't remember we did, I've fallen in a deep pool, asking again and again about the helmet, bizarre and ropey, your synesthesia like pine needles, a tender scratch, your nod, the together we barely had, in pieces. I feel like every time I read synesthesia, it sounds, I pronounce it different every time, so it's a very unusual word. So yeah, I'll read a part of the long piece that I have. So it's basically at the moment sort of a small novel length, and it has a main character in it who's actually also had a head injury. So there's a bit of a theme, I guess, going there. And he's kind of convalescing on his grandparents' farm, I guess, like in a kind of sort of isolation sense, which is interesting, seeing I started it last year. So he's kind of isolated on this farm and sort of trying to maintain it the best he can without really having any farming knowledge. And his grandparents, who used to live there, obviously kind of keep reappearing all the time. She woke to find one of the woofers next to the bed, naked on his knees, praying and mumbling something in German or Polish. He stood and wailed, scrambled at the quilt. She flicked on the lamp and she could see his eyes, black and glossy, like pools of sand. He tried to clamber onto the bed and she bucked her legs, hit him on the side of the head with her wrist, a dull slap. And he fell, stumbling to the floor, crashing into the dresser. She called for her husband, knowing he wasn't there, but thought it might frighten him off. He stood and walked calmly out of the room. She could hear him repeating something as he walked down the hallway and out the back towards the workers' cabin. She locked all the doors and windows, called 111. Wished she had some way to contact her husband and get him back here. She tried Margaret, but there was no answer, and urged to leave and make a run for it, over the hill to the next farm. Instead, she hid in the bathroom and locked the door, waiting in the corner. After what seemed like hours, the police arrived. And after a search, they found him, raving and lying in the furrows of the field he had helped plough the day before. His body plastered in dark red soil, smeared everywhere, over his eyes, his biceps, his stomach, his penis and feet. So rich, so red and deep, but it was the smell that got to her the most, that she could never forget, like chocolate and wine and shit. So I should have mentioned the she in the poem is his grandmother. In the story is his grandmother. So that's probably important. Muscles torn, back knotted, my body argues with itself. I've never wanted to sleep so much, but first eat and shower, then sleep. I lie on the floorboards in my underwear, the ropes in my back spasm and then relax. In the hallway, the spine of the house, I trace the line on the ceiling with my eyes. The part where the house was split open, transported here from up north. Still fresh, raw and torn as the day it was cut in two. I can see where the jam was split, where they had to cut a wall in half. And presumably, there's a line under my back too. I can remember the house with its insides exposed in the dark on the chassis of two trucks, and then flanked by utes with swiveling orange lights as the house set off for the motorway and its final destination. And there, in the bare leveled earth, it planted its feet. A veranda twirled around it like a cape, and the garage grew out into a comfortable second lounge. And eventually a newly gravelled driveway appeared. The lawn was seeded, and trees and shrubs grew into a shelter belt. But the scar remained, unplastered, unpainted, still as torn and rough as the day it was sawn. A reminder perhaps of its not so northern past. Or maybe my grandparents planned one day to split it up again in half, the house loaded back onto trucks, lurching off to some other destination. And as I lie there, the day ebbs away and I wonder if I should buy sandpaper and ceiling paint, if the buyers will even think to look up, if I will need plaster, or would that crack, if I should use something with silicone in it. And then I'm awake, morning light drifts under the door frame, a rooster somewhere gives it everything. The field wintered with covering crops, oats and rye and lupin, and in the spring the soil rich and fertile. Her husband turned it with a tractor, digging in the stalks and roots and withering leaves, and when she lifted a sod, worms wriggled and dripped from her hands as her husband worked behind her, preparing the cedar. And after she made dandelion lemonade and they sat on the veranda, aching backs, dried dirt caked on their foreheads, under the fingernails, hands, and behind the knees, the taste of it in their mouths. Then her husband said it was time to book the woofers they needed, and she said nothing. Watched the snapdragons and the lavender and the borage and the honeysuckle, their arrangement edging the lawn, but not in straight lines. They were curved and meandering, small enclaves to wait in, paths to wander down, a sanctuary from the industry of the farm. And it looked like her mother-in-law's, except all her flowers were edible, could be made into salads or tea, and that pleased her. No waste, everything farm, the farm everything. Okay, said her husband, we'll manage. In the wardrobe, I find cylindrical boxes, some large, some small, and some even smaller. And inside all of them, hats. Hats with brims, hats with feathers, veils, ribbons, bows, and brooches. I turn them around in my hands, admire the colour, most of them dark and opulent, but some lighter, like a shallow pool or a leaf. And I can't resist. I choose one with a wide brim. And in the mirror, except for the colour, I could almost pull it off. Terry Pratchett or Orson Welles, perhaps. But no, it's no good. My ears are too fleshy, like rubber frisbees. I need something that balances that out. I try another and another. I try all of them. And then in the back, in an old teal hat box, a rounded disc of felt, smooth, soft, shocking pink. I try it on and adjust it slant, like an old movie heroine. I pull the veil down like a shield over my chin. And in the mirror, behind smoky mesh, one eye, a hint of jaw and cheekbone, a pouted lip, and finally my nose, long and thin and elegant, like they always said, a beautiful nose, they always said, that could almost have been hers. Yeah, and I've got another regular short poem. It's called Red Shift, Blue Shift, which is probably worthwhile kind of explaining, is that it's, in my non-scientific way, it's a phenomenon that they used to tell that the universe is expanding. So I think stars moving away from us are slightly blue in their kind of like light spectrum, and anything moving towards us is slightly red, and they use that to prove that the universe is expanding, which was a really cool thing I read about once. And I also liked how, like, obviously red and blue comes up a lot in kind of human social stuff and politics and all that kind of thing. Red shift, blue shift. Don't forget the music, the shadow of its anomaly, that echo of a setting sun. Don't forget the sound of a police siren racing into the dark. Red and blue, red and blue. Don't forget your long-standing dream to cross the equator on a small rickety yacht. From the unbelievably huge to the unbelievably blue. Don't forget you have two glass eyes, the red one in the back, the front one in blue. In the meantime, don't forget that you don't shift. You are green in between. It is the people around you moving in and moving out, leaving behind a rather lovely outdoor setting, solar fairy lights winking all night, red and blue, red and blue. Don't forget to say goodbye as much as you say hello. Don't forget the pips on the hour, every hour. There is nothing new that you didn't already know. Your time has come. You can sign the timesheet. Your shift is overdue. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Bill. That was gorgeous. And I'm really looking forward to reading whatever this long piece of work is that you're working on. I look forward to seeing it when it's finished. It's sounding like it's going to be a novel to me. Just saying. Just saying. All right, we've got one final reader tonight. And Thank you so much for joining us, James. James, let me just get out my little bio. So our final reader is James Norcliffe. James is a poet, writer for children and editor. He's published 10 collections of poetry, most recently Deadpan from Otago University Press, which came out last year. His 12th novel for young people will be published later this year, and next year his first adult novel is coming out. He has co-edited major collections of poetry and short fiction, most recently Ko Aotearoa Tātou, We Are New Zealand, with Michelle Elvey and Paula Morris, and that is also going to be released later this year by Otago University Press. He's had a long association with the Canterbury Poets Collective, Takahe Magazine, Redraft, and more recently Flash Frontier. And James reads his work widely at events and festivals all around New Zealand and overseas as well. So thanks so much for joining us, James.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you very much, Therese and Rose and Chris, for organising this. It's wonderful to be here. Just a wee correction, the novel for big people is now being extended to 2022, and I blame coronavirus for that. I had a note from Penguin just the other day. I'd like to read from Deadpan, the book that Therese mentioned from Otago. And wanted to have got, what happens with coronavirus, I think everything seems to be refiltered and you have a look at it in a new sort of way. One of the things that hasn't happened this year, or it's not going to happen this year, is a visit from our daughter Lissy and her 2 little boys and husband. They live in the UK and were going to come out, but they can't. And the book opens with a poem that Lissy prompted when she was pregnant in the city of Bonn with her first boy about 5 years ago. She sent us a little scan, the intrauterine scan that came through, and it was on our phone, and it was quite a freaky little moment to see this little creature in a little movie on iPhones. So it's called Scan. Such a tiny finger, so clear there in the phone. I think of Michelangelo, God, and Adam, and point, putting my own finger to yours, to move your image from landscape to portrait. A portrait in black and white, the profile of a swimmer, small nose, open mouth, suck. And you are all there, sex, arm and leg, thigh, everything if I were to inspect you closely, everything for now, except the name, the voice. Yet these, like so much else, will come with the imminent business of birth, of life, of love and touch and seasons. As I scroll you back into landscape, the world about you waiting, changing, even as you begin to begin. And 3 years later, she had her next little child, a little boy called Sebastian, and he was not a sleeper. And this is called Night Watch. Because your child could not sleep, you could not sleep. Then when your child finally slept, because your child could wake up, you could not sleep. And so the night became heavy. In that heaviness, you could hear the breath of trees, the stretch of ceilings, the flecks of walls. When at last your eyes did close, there was something at the window. Then an open door. Then a dark lake. Your child standing there, open-eyed, awake. I have written a poem about New Zealand's smallest frog. It's a pretty little thing called Hochstetter's frog, and it's under threat, like most of our fauna, from borrowed creatures. Hochstetter's frog. Tiny jeweled pawn, all eyes, mouth and legs, half sprung for jumping. You could have been a radio star if the dice hadn't rolled the radio's way. Eyes closed, a crooner swaying in an unseen green tuxedo. Instead, you crouch in moss and spawn, wet, weak, eyes wide open, feet flexed and curled, primed to leap, compelled to creep up out of the creek, up out of the whole bleak, benighted world. Those of you who know Christchurch might know that the Avon River, when it gets near the sea, broadens, becomes quite wide instead of being the little creek it usually is. And there's a sandbank on that river stretch called Naughty Boys Island, which is a lovely name. And about 20 years ago, the last time I was in a high school teaching, one of the students who was a reprobate of no mean proportions was busily down New Brighton Road and was caught coining cars and jumped in the river to get away from the chase and unfortunately drowned. So it's a little tragic story called Naughty Boys Island. Not so much an island, more a grey sandbank dividing a grey river where it broadened out between lines of pollarded tamarisks just before Brighton. You had always lived there, dreamt of crouching among the reeds, the debris, the silt-stained plastic bags and broken bottles, of claiming your muddy citizenship. Although you were never as naughty as the river, which wet your stolen cigarettes, extinguished your matches. Let me take you to my island, the wicked river whispered. I'll be waiting here for you when you have coined those fucking cars, kicked those letterboxes over, the wicked river lied. Trust my channels, trust my current, trust my rushing tide. And here's one of those poems that seems to have a new sort of purchase now. It was written referencing a time we were in China about 30, 40 years ago. And we visited the city of Qingdao and went swimming with half of the Chinese population, I think. So it says a little bit about social distancing for the madness of crowds. The only shells on the beach are the high-priced shells on the stall tables, high-priced shells sheltered by canvas. The beach itself cannot be seen. Bodies. You maneuver gingerly between them and make your way to the water. Bodies. You make your way between them. Legs, arms, heads covered in towels. There is no delineation between the sand line and the water line because of the bodies. Bodies massed at the unseen border, two worlds merged into one. As you move into the water, the bodies grow shorter, lose legs, lose thighs, waists, midriffs. As you move further out, the bodies become disembodied, lose chests, breasts, shoulders. Now just heads, neck deep in water. Heads and beach balls, bodiless balls bobbing among the bodied heads. Now you must tiptoe and bounce to keep your head above the water, now visible beyond the heads, beyond beach balls. Somewhere beyond these there is water moving, heaving water. Somewhere beyond is the sea. Somewhere beyond the sea are continents, bodies. And the second poem that has a new purchase. It was really written about the myrtle rust, because I'm a bit of a plant freak, and I was very, very worried about the arrival of this rust, which was going to kill all my Lophomertus and Potocara and all the other myrtles in the garden. But yeah, I'm frightened of the rust. It's called Invasion. I'm frightened of the rust spores catching the wind. They're all but invisible filaments billowing as the light thickens. The market for mulching machines will soar, chips will fly, parks and gardens whine as the piles rise. So what if the worst case scenario is also the best case scenario? The green spotted with yellow, the brown dropping to the ground. Pine pollen dusts the pond even as the trees die. Such is the way of the world. Put your mask on. Hold my hand. Of course, we don't get to hold people's hands with our masks on. And finally, I'd like to read a silly piece, sort of a prose poem called Control Tower. Roger desired a control tower. Joanne saw through him immediately. And the garden, said Roger. No, said Joanne. It would be nice, Roger insisted, positioned between the Therese forest pansy and the Cornus Eddy's white wonder. It would clash. It would have a certain majesty, a garden sculpture. It would out-sculpture all other garden sculptures, but tender, slender, towering. No, said Joanne. It would make a statement, said Roger. It would have stature, heights, lights. I have read Freud, said Joanne. Red for port, green for starboard, and blue for the ineffable sadness of the world, said Roger. No colours, said Joanne. And it would be useful, said Roger, for the control of air traffic. We don't have air traffic, said Joanne, but I do believe now we're really getting to the nub of it. There is air traffic, said Roger. Lights high in the sky, vapour trails like ribbons to paradise. You don't want to control ribbons or vapour, said Joanne. Let them be. It would make a statement, said Roger. No, said Joanne, no control tower. But, said Roger. No buts, said Joanne. No colours, no traffic, no lights, no tower. That's me. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks so much, James. Poor Roger. Great, thank you. Well, that actually brings us to the end, everyone. So I just wanted to say a final thank you to our readers tonight. So thank you so much to Kate Camp, Mary Macpherson, Bill Nelson, and James Norcliffe. It's been lovely hearing you. All right, thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Therese, Chris, and Rose. It was really awesome that you set this up. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, everyone.
So,
Yeah, and thanks everyone for coming too.
yes, indeed. Lovely. All right. See you guys. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.